Hello class. Today we're going to be going over Nixon and the Watergate scandal. This is a scandal that took place either during your parents' time or your grandparents' time. This is something that many people out my age and older know about. Your age is probably still yet to learn about it. It involved Richard Nixon, who was one of the presidents of the United States, and some of his most acclaimed achievements came in his quest for world stability. During visits in 1972 to Beijing and Moscow, he reduced tensions with China and the USSR. His summit meetings with the Russian leaders produced a treaty to limit strategic nuclear weapons. And in January of 1973, he announced an accord with North Vietnam to end American involvement in Indochina. In 1974, his Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, negotiated disengagement agreements between Israel and its opponents, Egypt and Syria. And as you know today, that is still a place that is very unsettled right now in the Middle East, and this is something that he actually was a part of back in the 70s. So things haven't changed a lot for that part of the world. Now, some of Nixon's policies. Nixon was looking to better relations with Russia, and he wanted to limit the nuclear weapons, and he also was a part that helped produce the first Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, which froze the nuclear missiles, the ICBMs, on both sides at the present level. Basically what that's saying is, we know how many you've got, how many America's got, we know how many the Soviet Union's got, and what we're trying to do is we're going to freeze it right there. Nobody's going to build any more. And that's what his policy was hoping to do. And at the time, it seemed like a pretty good deal, but it didn't. Things don't always work out the way you think they would. The Watergate scandal, however, was nothing to do with any of the policies that he had committed with or worked on with Russia. The Watergate scandal was a political scandal that occurred in the United States in the 70s as a result of the June 1972 break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate office complex in Washington, D.C., and the Nixon administration attempted cover-up of its involvement. See, the scandal eventually led to the resignation of President Richard Nixon, and that was on August the 9th of 1974. He is the only president who has ever resigned. The scandal also resulted in indictment, trial, conviction, and incarceration of 43 other people, including dozens of Nixon's top administrative officials. There were positives and there were negatives with Watergate. Some of the positives: Watergate helped create a set of standards for all future presidents. In other words, they knew what they could do and what they could not do. They knew what they could get away with and what they could not get away with. It inspired investigative journalism. At this point, people just reported on what they were told. Now, people are digging a little deeper, trying to find out what there is to find out. It also opened up the Freedom of Information Act. The Freedom of Information Act is used very widely today, and it is not only used for political reasons, but it also used for personal reasons. You know, just like, for instance, there is a lawsuit going on today with Houston Nutt and Ole Miss College, and it all goes back to the Freedom of Information Act because he asked for phone records from one of the coaches, and they had to give them to him. Now, some of the negatives: it shows you the distrust in politicians. The resignation of President Nixon. And given their cynicism, Americans are less likely to vote now because of this, at this time. They're less likely to think their vote matters because of all the things that have taken place with Watergate. Now, this was back in the 70s. I mean, things have a tendency to change over time. But I want you to look at this video.
Good evening. This is the 37th time I have spoken to you from this office, where so many decisions have been made that shape the history of this nation. Each time I have done so to discuss with you some matter that I believe affected the national interest. In all the decisions I have made in my public life, I have always tried to do what was best for the nation. throughout the long and difficult period of Watergate, I have felt it was my duty to persevere, to make every possible effort to complete the term of office to which you elected me. In the past few days, however, it has become evident to me that I no longer have a strong enough political base in the Congress to justify continuing that effort. I would have preferred to carry through to the finish, whatever the personal agony it would have involved. And my family unanimously urged me to do so. But the interests of the nation must always come before any personal considerations. From the discussions I have had with congressional and other leaders, I have concluded that because of the Watergate matter, I might not have the support of the Congress that I would consider necessary to back the very difficult decisions and carry out the duties of this office in the way the interests of the nation will require. I have never been a quitter. To leave office before my term is completed is abhorrent to every instinct in my body. But as president, I must put the interests of America first. America needs a full-time president and a full-time Congress, particularly at this time with problems we face at home and abroad. To continue to fight through the months ahead for my personal vindication would almost totally absorb the time and attention of both the President and the Congress in a period when our entire focus should be on the great issues of peace abroad and prosperity without inflation at home. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
As you can see, this was something that was very hard for him to do, but he did announce that Gerald Ford would be taking over, who was his vice president. And when Gerald Ford took the oath of office on August the 9th of 1974, he declared, "I assumed the presidency under extraordinary circumstances. This is an hour of history that troubles our minds and hurts our hearts." And, you know, after being sworn in as president, Ford, one of the first things he did is he pardoned Richard Nixon for his part in the Watergate scandal. And if you don't know what that is, basically what he did was he said anything that he had to do with the Watergate scandal, he's free of, he's clear of, and you cannot try him for it. A pardon from the president means it didn't happen, basically is what it means.
Therefore, I, Gerald R. Ford, President of the United States, pursuant to the pardon power conferred upon me by Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, have granted, and by these presents do grant, a full, free, and absolute pardon unto Richard Nixon for all offenses against the United States which he, Richard Nixon, has committed or may have committed or taken part in during the period from July 20, 1969 through August 9, 1974.
Gerald Ford inherited the presidency under enviable circumstances. He had to try to rebuild confidence in government after the Watergate scandals and to restore economic prosperity in the midst of difficult domestic and international conditions. He enjoyed some success in the first of these efforts, but very little in the second. Jimmy Carter. Because the public still did not trust the politicians, Jimmy Carter ran as a Washington outsider, a popular position in the post-Watergate era, and he won a narrow victory to become the next president of the United States. In conclusion, the Watergate scandal caused President Nixon to eventually resign. Vice President Ford became the first vice president and subsequently president to not be elected, and to this day is still the only president not to be elected. And with Americans still not trusting the institution of government and politicians, an outsider by the name of Jamie Cowart was elected when Ford's term came up for re-election.